So I recently beat the village portion of Monster Hunter 1, doing all of the quests available in it, and this is specifically the Japanese version, which has some differences for sure in the quest front at the very least. But for a little bit of background so you kind of understand the context that I'm coming from, I've played every game except the first one for at least a small amount of time. So anything post 5th gen I've completed. I started with Generations actually on 3DS. I've beaten that one plenty of times. I've beaten Generations Ultimate plenty of times. I have soloed 3 Ultimate twice, which is weird because I'm not a big fan of underwater, but I guess I just really like the land combat enough in that one. The monsters are pretty unique there. I have soloed 4 Ultimate up to Dalamadur, and I've done the village portions of the game multiple times, but I've never gotten to Gogmazio solo, or even, with other people, which again is weird since I think I enjoy the combat of that game at the very least. I think I do. I don't know. Maybe I don't. Then I've beaten Portable Third solo, and then that's about where the consistency ends, if you can even call it that. I've played a little bit of Freedom Unite. I think I've beaten the village portion of that. I know I've played a little bit of the hub stuff, but not enough for me to remember very much about it. Freedom 2 is not really something I've touched at all. I've played Freedom 1, I think, past Monoblos, if even. I know for sure past Rathalos, but I'm not sure if I ever beat Monoblos or not. And then very small amounts of DOS. I've tried to play DOS many times in the past. I could never really get that far. I think I would always get up to like Plesioth and then just kind of decide that it was better to not play the game, which I'm sure is a very common experience. So I do have some experience in the series. I didn't just, play my first Monster Hunter game and then say, I'm going to go back to the first game and try to play it all the way through. If you've ever tried that, you've probably either stuck with it, which is great, or like most people, I assume you probably just drop the game after a certain point, because it's definitely a much more polarizing experience compared to the latter games in the series. So I've put about 60 hours, I'd say at least, into the game. At this current point, I am farming for Monoblos Hearts and rusted weapons, specifically the hammer, but also kind of the lance as well. That's been fun. Monoblos Hearts are a 1% carve, and you get 4 of them per Monoblos, so, that's going to take a while. And then rust stones are their own whole bag of worms that you don't really get. You just kind of keep hammering away with your pickaxe and hoping you get it. But I'm pretty much right at the point where I'm fixing to enter into town quests, or at the very least attempt to do those solo. So I think I have a pretty okay grasp on what the village has to provide for you. If I don't, then something's wrong. So one of the big things about the game are the controls being very notorious for how clunky they are. And that's just kind of a thing for the series, being slower than the average game. Again, more modern entries, not quite so much, but even still, there's that kind of small amount of sluggishness that you can kind of feel in the controls, the commitment and things like that, even if it is kind of rapidly diminishing. Here, it's honestly fairly standard. One of the big things is that you do not attack with the buttons this game, and then in DOS, you attack with the right analog stick. So your face buttons are kind of weird. Triangle is not really used for that much. It may be used for chat if you go online, but if not, it's just kind of used for getting tips from the Elder for like the first few quest drinks, and then he just quits talking to you. And then your right stick will just kind of do random things. So let's say if you want to do an up thrust with Lance, you will pull back on it. If you press forward, you'll do a forward poke. Things like that. Once you get used to it, it's fine. It's just getting over the learning curve of forgetting that you can't move the camera with the right stick and not pressing buttons to attack. It's certainly not my preferred way to play the game, but you do get used to it. And in a vacuum by itself, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. It's not like revolutionary, this feels super amazing, but it does the job at the very least. The camera, since it's not on the right stick, ends up being on the D-pad, and you've probably heard of the claw before for the PSP titles. Here, kind of, I guess you probably can claw it, but I didn't use a PlayStation 2 controller. I don't like PlayStation controllers, so I generally use either an Xbox controller or like the one I've been using currently is the Switch 2 Pro controller. So your left side of the controller is kind of swapped, and I prefer it that way. But since that's the case, I can't really do a claw because moving the left stick with your index finger doesn't sound like the most fun thing in the world. So again, like I said before, in a vacuum, D-pad camera controls can work fine. I kind of do, I guess you could consider it a reverse claw, and I'll have my thumb in between both the D-pad and the right stick. Majority of the time you can use L to center the camera behind you, but if you want to do like vertical changing or just, you know, some quick movements, things like that, it's pretty easy for me to slide my thumb over to the D-pad and kind of move them around like that. And since you can just set a static position for the vertical setting on the D-pad, you press up for a certain position. You know, if you played anything before Gen 4, it's the exact same here. Camera mechanics, I'll get into that, but the way you use the camera at the very least is the same. And that works fine. You know, you set it to a comfortable vertical position, and then you'll just use the L button. And if you absolutely need to, I can just slide my thumb over and change the horizontal position if it's, you know, absolutely required. And that feels pretty comfortable. I know the claw is like generally bad for your hands, but this doesn't feel too uncomfortable even after playing for a while. And if I really want to, I can move my thumb back up to the face buttons if I need to. You know, there's not really too many things that require you to be super quick in this game. So it is okay to be a little bit more methodical with how you're pressing your buttons, and probably more encouraged too, just depending on what it is. By the time you've gotten into a situation where you have to be like meshing and things like that, you've probably messed up beforehand, or it's just completely out of your control with how this game likes to be. So the biggest problem I have with the camera is not how you use it, but how it interacts with the game world. So as long as you're on a flat surface with nothing else in the area with you, it works fine. So think about a dunes area, you know, a lot of times there's no walls in those bottom two areas where you fight Cephadrome. However, if there gets to be anything in the way of the camera moving, because in this game, the camera is, I guess, a physical object, and it reacts to the world around it. So let's say you're up against a wall, you try to move the camera into a wall, it will either slide up and along the wall with much resistance, or it will just stop completely. If you try to run into a wall with the camera in the wrong position, it will just turn you around, which is bad if you're trying to like get a Monobliss stuck in a wall, because you're gonna probably end up running into it, or the mini Genprey that love to hang by Monobliss as well. It's not fun. And there are certain areas as well that love to just like zoom the camera in. The main one in particular is, I think, Area 10. It may not be Area 10, but the long skinny area in the Forest and Hills map has the camera zoomed in for whatever reason. I guess because it's a tight corridor area. That's like one of the worst areas in the game. You have the bad camera already. It's a bunch of tight corridors, so the camera's not behaving anyways. And just generally a bad place. They love to put, you know, Meleeks in there, which love to steal your items, and then super large monsters that are just kind of annoying. It's a very perfect storm, I guess, for being incredibly annoying. You also have Apsaros. If you're fighting in an area with those, they just love to mess the camera up since they're so large, and they'll kind of group up together. So you're going to have the camera like moving up and down and being completely vertical, looking at a bird's eye view with you, making it so you can't see or do anything really strategical unless you have like a shield or something, which even then, you know, you don't want to block some attacks sometimes. It ends up just being incredibly annoying. I don't know when it changed. I haven't played really any of the other Generation 1 or 2 games like Freedom or Freedom Unite, Freedom 2 or DOS in a while. So I don't know when that became the camera just zooms in if it hits an object like that, or if it like, you know, does other random things, but it's not enjoyable in this game unless there's like nothing to bother it. But, you know, if you're fighting a monster, there's one thing at the very least to bother it. So that's fun. The overall feel of the controls, again, like I've said before, it's fine in a vacuum. There's some weird inconsistencies. I don't know if it's like dropped inputs or what. It's not end lag, I know for sure. But you can just be walking and like trying to use a whetstone or a potion, and the game just doesn't want you to use it. You like mash it 5 or 6 times, and it will eventually give it to you, but by the time that happens, you're probably going to get hit anyways. So that kind of stinks. I have seen there are some like patches and stuff for that, but I want to try to have the vanilla experience as, you know, similarly as I can without, you know, having to use a controller I don't like, which I guess is kind of self-defeating, but oh well, it's my game. I can play it how I want. You do kind of get used to these mechanics. Again, I've played for 60 hours now, so I would hope I would get used to them, but you learn how to mitigate them or play the game in a way to where those don't become as much of an issue. And I think that's the big thing. Once you get over the massive mountain of learning the mechanics and what to do here and what to do there, the game becomes slightly more manageable. But until you get to that point, and especially if you're like just, you know, experiencing it for fun, I can completely and totally understand why folks don't really stick with it, because it is very much a commitment. And my mindset coming into the game was not, you know, just I'm gonna play through all the key quests and make weapons as I go along and do all that like you can do in anything, I guess, post 3rd gen. The mindset that I had was to do all of the quests, take it slow. I don't have any particular goal in mind. I'm just playing the game. If I want to make a weapon, I'll make a weapon. Generally, I'm going to go and look up what the higher raw weapons I can figure out are and make that, you know, some educated decisions, I guess. Try to do my research before I spend 15 hours into making a weapon that really isn't particularly good compared to my other things. It is kind of weird. Weapon balance in this game is incredibly odd. In low rank, okay, I was talking about the rust stones, so I can kind of go into that here. Rust stones, if you've played some other games in the series, are ways to get special weapons, either like an iron weapon or an upgraded iron weapon. But there's also rusted weapons that you can polish a rust stone and get a rusted weapon. And you have to put a whole bunch of materials into making this really good, sometimes, depending on the game, at the end of the line weapon. So how you obtain them is generally through mining, and in high rank, you can get quite a few of them. But I'm in Village, which is low rank, and there's only one spot in the game in low rank where you can actually mine rust stones, and that is in the volcano at Area 8. You have a 5% chance to mine one in a particular spot. Mining nodes are fixed in this game. Again, anything generally pre-3rd gen. I think this does include Try, though. It may include Portable 3rd as well. In fact, it may be through Ultimate where they added kind of the despawning mechanics of the gathering spots, but anything's fixed. So mining spots, herb spots, mushroom spots, those are all stuck in one position, so you go to the exact same spot every single time. So once you get one of these rust stones, you can take it back to the village, and it is one of the however many weapon types. There are no dual blades in the Japanese version, so there's at the very least one less that you don't have to worry about getting and wasting if you're not using dual blades like I am not. So if it does end up being a rusted weapon, you can then put a bunch of, I think it's 120 for each weapon, earth crystals, and then like at least 100,000 zen, if not more, into it. And this will actually give you one of the best weapons in the base game for hammer and lance. It's not like, you know, 100% the best. They're the highest raw weapons, but sharpness is not, you know, terribly high, so you would rather use Fatalis or something else like that. From my gathering, I think they do rebalance them in G, so they're not as good, but for right now, they are the best in slot for just pure raw damage, and since I can't get Fatalis until I get to high rank, I think it's a pretty good, you know, trade-off. I'll use the less sharpness, and even then I have the final bone lance and hammer, which do perfectly fine on the sharpness front. And for whatever reason, lance has like super high raw on its weapons compared to other weapons. I don't know why that's the case, other than it being a fairly clunky weapon if you don't know how to use it. And even then, I probably don't use it well, but I can get by with it. Really just depends on the monster matchup, I guess. But you've probably seen like headlocking and things with Lance just because, you know, it's a fairly effective strategy if you know how to use it well. And it is, you know, kind of fun having the best weapon available in low rank if you put enough work into it is not common at all. I don't know if there are any other games in the series that are that way. Maybe 4 with the relics, but I highly doubt that. I'm sure you have to like have higher grade materials than just earth crystals to upgrade it, right? But in this game you can, so that's kind of cool. I'm trying to take advantage of that while I can. But another thing is just the general pacing of the game is slower in general. Obviously control wise and monster wise they're slower, but gathering isn't super easy for the materials you're going to use on a particular hunt. Since there's no farm in the game, you're going to have to manually get your honey or your herbs. Well, actually you can buy herbs, but blue mushrooms, things like that if you want to make potions or mega potions, which actually only require an herb and honey for mega potions in this game, which is kind of nice, you know. If you're having to pick them up by hand, then it's nice to not also have to go grab a mushroom as well. There are some certain ways to circumvent gathering certain items. So flash bombs, for example, have the multitude of quests that they just give them to you in. So one in particular, I think it's the Formidable Velocidrome, I think that's what the quest is called, gives you 4 flash bombs. So as long as you can kill the Velocidrome without using any flash bombs, you get 4 free flash bombs. And that generally, at the very least, from what I can tell, I haven't actually found any flash bugs ever, but I think that's going to be one of the fastest ways. You figure out where it spawns, you take a hammer and just like do your spin golf swings, and you're going to get that done in like under 3 minutes. You're not having to worry about making bomb casings or anything like that. So that's generally my way of farming flash bombs. There are some other items like that as well that they give you for free that you can kind of just utilize. Sonic bombs aren't that way. They only give you those in the Cephalos and I think Cephadrome quests, and you're probably going to want to use them against those, so you're not going to be keeping them. But they do supply you with a lot of screamers from Velocidrome, any of the dromes, I think, other than maybe Cephadrome. And then Kut-Ku gives out a lot. And if you're farming Kut-Ku for armor, you're going to get a lot of screamers. You can buy the fire herbs that are needed for that to craft with nitro shrooms, which you can find in Forest and Hills pretty easily to make gunpowder. Combine those with screamers, you have a sonic bomb. So that's not too terrible. The single page of items that you can carry in your home box is kind of annoying, but I do think the game is balanced around it. Time-wise, there's not too many efficient things in the game, but material-wise, I've found it pretty consistent as long as I'm using the correct weapon to be able to just bring like a stack of herbs and then whatever supply items they give me to complete a quest. So Monoblos, I do that. I don't need sonic bombs. I don't need flash bombs. They do help the quest go a little bit faster, but again, you're trading time for material efficiency, right? Rathalos is a special case because he's really, really annoying, loves to fly around all over the place and waste your time there. Not that really flash bombs help too much in that regard unless you get him on the uptake. But if you don't, you're just kind of at his mercy of whether he flies around or not. But other than him, most other monsters in the game have some particular way to exploit their moveset that you don't have to worry about using up all of your special items. So other than like, you know, the first 2 times I hunt it, just to get used to the moveset, I'm generally just going to try to bring as little as I possibly can into a hunt. Maybe some stakes, maybe some whetstones. You know, I'll generally just have those in my item slot because I don't want them taking up too much space in my box anyways. So you do see some kind of synergy there, how the mechanics play with each other. And it is kind of a breath of fresh air. It is weird going from Wilds to this. You know, it's going to be a complete, you know, night and day difference. But even by itself, I don't think how the mechanics of your item management work is a bad thing. I could see this actually being quite a bit of fun in a 4th gen setting, right? Again, it just depends on how the game is balanced around it, and I think they do a pretty okay job of doing that. We'll see how that continues when I get into high rank and even low rank hub, but until then, I think it's pretty good. I actually kind of like it. One of the things I do not like, however, is the insistency of the game to waste your time. And this is very common in a lot of monsters. The first one you're probably going to see it on is either Ginprey, the little ones, or Cephadrome. So Ginprey, you know them, you love them. They're the paralysis version of Velociprey. They're gonna jump. Sometimes when they hit you, they will paralyze you. It's not consistent. It's not like a 2 hits and you're paralyzed. They'll just sometimes hit you and you'll be paralyzed. It's honestly kind of like how when your weapon hits, you have like a 1 in 3 chance of applying the status. I guess it's kind of the same way for them, which is kind of funny, but it's not very funny when you're paralyzed in front of a Monoboss, you know. I do not like Ginprey. They're my least favorite monster in the game so far. I'd rather fight Cephalos. They can still paralyze you, but they don't do it as often, and they don't normally come in like hordes of 5 or 6. But the main large monster you're probably going to see this on first is Cephadrome. And if you know Cephalos, you'll know Cephadrome, and I guess Cephalos would be the first small monster you see it on. They love to go under the ground. And that's why they give you Sonic Bombs to get them out of the ground. Once you run out of those, and once you run out of your mini barrel bombs, which also have a similar effect, you're just kind of out of luck and you have to hope that the monster wants to get out of the ground. Now, like I said before, depending on the weapon you're using, you can kind of exploit some things they do. So one of the consistent ways, if you have the mini barrel bombs, which is another item actually, similar to flash bombs, they love to give you a lot of those and they seem to have no purpose until you actually fight Cephadrome, when you realize you can actually get him out of the ground if you land it close enough to him. But one of the things you can exploit is when Cephadrome does a sand spit from under the ground, he will always pop right back up after it before he does a different attack. So you can either place a mini barrel bomb there, or if you're out of all of your equipment, you can use your hammer, ready a super pound, and land it on him as soon as he pops back up on his fin. And that's almost 100 motion value from the hammer alone. And he does it fairly often sometimes. Again, it just depends on how the monster feels that way, whether he's going to spend his entire time under the ground or he's actually going to try to interact with you. But that is a consistent way, and if you're timing out on it, generally, especially for, you know, unless it's something like Rathalos, generally that's because your equipment is not up to snuff, and that's another nice thing about the balancing. The materials that you need are fairly easy to obtain early on, so a lot of times you can like really push a weapon very far in its upgrade path just by unlocking one singular piece. So medium monster bones and then large monster bones give you a lot of power in upgrading your weapons for the next monster, and you end up feeling perfectly fine in Village, at the very least with your times, as long as you're upgraded. One of the problems I had though is I didn't upgrade my lance that I was using against Cephadrome, and I was having a particularly difficult time against him. But once I took the time to go and farm Kutku, which gives attack up small, which is worthless in this game, and then a better lance, I was taking less damage, so I could actually stay in the fight for longer, and I was dealing more damage with the lance that I was doing. Standard Monster Hunter stuff, it's the core of the series, but it is fairly easy to distinguish and kind of nice in the first game, too, once you get around all of the fluff around it. But after you defeat Cephadrome, in the Japanese version of the game, I'm not sure how it is in the English release, but you're pretty much maybe gonna fight some Eodrome and just, you know, like more Kutku and things like that. But your next new large monster is pretty much going to just be Rathalos. I think there's a quest in the rank before Rathalos for mushrooms that you can fight Gypceros in, but it's never a main objective. You can just kind of do that as a side objective. So Rathalos, I probably don't even have to say anything. If you've seen anything about Monster Hunter 1, you know how bad Rathalos is. He will spend upwards of 5+ minutes at a time just flying him around the map. There are still ways to take advantage of how he moves, but it's more annoying and you can't always guarantee that it's going to work too well. So Rathalos loves to do this thing where he'll go up in the air and fly around the zone to try and land a air tackle on you. And he'll do like 2 or 3 loops if you just stand still, try to give him as clear of a sight line as possible. He'll do 2 or 3 loops and then he'll come in for the landing. You dodge it, he will fly off the side of the map most of the time, but if you can get him to aim it correctly, you're really cooperating with him here. You can get him to land right back on the map and then go back to attacking him. Hopefully he does a fireball or something like that. But most of the time he's going to fly off the side of the map, go into like one of the valleys, fly back up, and then go to the designated landing spot for that area. And you can time that. If you have barrel bombs, you can put stuff there. If you want to use a flash bomb, that's a great place to do it because you can consistently get it off as long as you understand how flash bombs work. If you don't, you're going to miss them a lot. After all of your other equipment is gone, you can go ahead and ready a super pound with hammer, or try to use a different weapon and ready an attack like that. I just do hope that you have something that has some kind of super armor because you're going to get blown around a lot from the wind pressure. So on top of that particular attack, which he can chain into itself, and if you also do not line it up for him, if you keep moving, he's sometimes just going to leave because you're not cooperating with him. And when he leaves, hope you have a paintball on him. If you don't, you're going to be chasing him probably for the next 10 minutes. Or he'll just go to another area and keep repeating the same thing. Another common thing, and it's something that also applies to some other monsters as well, is that there are these weird AI loops that the monsters get into. So for Rathalos, as another example, since we were just talking about him, he would start in the area that he spawns in the Attack of the Rathalos quest. So I would either throw a flash bomb at him, of course I'd paintball him first before anything else, do a couple of attacks, he'd get up, fly away after the flash bomb ended, go to the northernmost area. You'd fight him there for maybe a minute at most, he'd get back up, go to the long skinny area, the one I was talking about before with the mailings and the bad camera. Then he'd stay there for like 5 minutes, and then get up and go to the area north of the nest. But he wouldn't stay there. He would land, you'd probably catch up to him by the time he landed. If you didn't make it that far, then, you know, you'd probably get to see him as he's taking right back off to go to the same area he was just in before. So you chase him back there, you fight him in the bad area again, you're probably not getting a lot of hits off if you don't know what to do. And then he gets back up and goes to the area north of the nest again. And he just keeps doing this over and over until you either just quit out, time out, or he starts to limp and then he'll kind of do his normal shenanigans. This was very weird because one of the ways I figured out how to break it, of course you can, you know, just kind of continuously abandon the quest until he stops doing that. You can't reset the game, that it still just keeps doing that. I mean, I guess you probably could, it would have the same effect, but abandoning is quicker. The weirdest thing was that if I threw a paintball as he landed in that long skinny area, he would decide, I don't want to fight here anymore. He maybe would stay there for like a minute, but then he would get up, go to the area north of the nest, and he would stay there. And this was consistent. I don't know what caused it. I don't know what kind of effect a paintball would have on the monster to make it do that, but it happened. Monobolus has similar things, so majority of the time he'll stay in the northernmost areas, but sometimes he'll start and then go down to one of the bottom sand areas that you fight Sevidrome in. That is not a fun area to fight in, so usually I'll just abandon a couple of times until he quits doing that, and then you're all home free. And sometimes he'll get like stuck in a loop in the first area where he'll charge back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and until you like get him down to a low enough HP percentage to enrage him or knock him over, he'll just kind of keep doing that, which is nice for free hits. It's just that that area isn't super fun because there are Ginprey and you have to get through quite a bit of those Ginprey before they stop spawning. So it's a real give and take there, unfortunately. Not that I expect the, you know, most high fidelity AI in the game, but you do notice it sometimes, and it is very annoying sometimes. Makes you really appreciate monsters like Viserios, which just stay in one area and are predictable in what they're going to do. But once you finish Rathalos, you're pretty much just on to Monobolus. You may have like a capture Rathalos quest and some other, you know, drome quests, but after that, your next new large monster is Monobolus, which you're probably aware of is pretty much just a carbon copy of Diablos, which loves to dig. Again, like I said before, I don't normally bring Sonic Bombs when I'm farming him. He gets out of the ground pretty quickly. You can find it pretty annoying at first, but if you play the game for long enough, it'll put enough of a patience into you. And if it doesn't, you're probably going to quit. But you get used to it. You know how to avoid the certain attacks and whatnot. You just don't get the extra damage from like trapping him and things like that with sonic bombs. But still, you know, kind of providing that game philosophy of let's not let you hit the monster and let's let the monster have free shots at you. Then once you beat Monoblos, that's your credits, and then you go into unlocking the secret monsters, which are just kind of in the urgent quest list once you unlock them, which is nice. The Japanese version of the game has this rotating quest thing where you'll get 5 of the quests in a given rank, and you have to like abandon the quest, which is nice. You can at the very least abandon for it, or like reset the game just to get the quest to cycle or complete another quest, of course. I don't think the English version has it, and if it does, I think it's just like semi-rotating. I did play up to 2-star in the English version of the game, but then I realized that it doesn't have town quests, so I went to the Japanese version of the game. And it's annoying when you're trying to farm a particular quest that isn't one of the urgent quests, but if it's an urgent quest, you can kind of just pick whatever you want, whenever you want. Viserius, I think, was the first one I took on. He likes to tackle, so he's kind of a mini Monoblos of sorts. His tackles take him very far away, and that would be the part of the hunt that is just kind of, hey, you're not going to get to attack the monster because he's going to go to the other side of the map, and you have to run and catch up to him, and in the time that you're running and catching up to him, he's probably started another tackle, and he's going to do that again. You can kind of offset that by staying off to his sides as much as you can, because then he'll, you know, actually do his close range stuff, but a lot of the time he'll end up in these tackle loops that you have to try to break. Also, it's Viserius. It's got very hard skin, so if you're not using green sharpness, then you're gonna bounce on almost everything except for maybe the stomach. So that's another part of that design philosophy. Gravios actually found to not be too bad. You still have the lava parts in the area you fought him in the volcano. I don't know if he can move or not. He never did when I fought him, and I fought him for like 15 minutes. But other than that, he's okay. He does have the heat beam that Viserios hardly ever does, but he does it a lot more in Gravios. I didn't feel like I was bouncing as much on him, but I was using, I think, green sharpness by that point, so I probably would have been if I had only yellow. He didn't really feel that bad. Kazu is reverse Monoblos in that he will jump on the ceiling if he's in a cave area and kind of hang out up there until he decides he wants to get back down. And then you have Diablos, which is just Monoblos again, but worse, actually. And how he's worse is that Monoblos, when he gets enraged, has this roar combo. So if you're using anything without a shield, you can be stunned by the roar, and if he decides to tackle while he's enraged, he moves fast enough to where he can tag you with that if you're not like a distance behind him. So he has to do 2 head turns and then still has to cover that distance. If you're anywhere in front of him, he's probably just going to turn to you if he decides to tackle and hit you. That's not fun. Don't really like that. I don't even know if there are earplugs in this game. And even if there are, it's the long roar, so it may not even work on Monoblos. Diablos is worse in that Monoblos, you can normally wait out the enrage, and he doesn't, you know, just do it permanently after a certain health threshold. Diablos does do that, though. Once you get him under a certain amount of HP, he will just kind of be enraged all of the time. And you can technically wait out the enraged, but on the next attack, he'll just become enraged again. So that's not fun if you're not using a shield weapon. If you are, like Lance, then you can kind of just block it or get hit by the roar and block the tackle if it's what he decides to do. And if not, you can just reposition if you need to or whatnot. There are also some just like quick jabs and stuff. The game is very cumbersome to stand in under a monster with. I don't think that makes any sense. When you try to stand in under a monster, a lot of times when they move their legs, they'll have these trample animations, which are very common. I think even in World, there may have been a couple, but they're pretty bad here, and hit reactions are also just kind of odd. If they'll kick you from the backside of their leg, you're going to fall forward. Don't know how that works, but okay. But getting close to the monster also just in general is cumbersome. Wind pressure, very common in monsters with wings that actually, you know, take off into the air, or even Monoblos when he digs, he has wind pressure when he attacks. And a lot of times that's going to end up getting you hit, which is not fun. That is a staple of the series though early on, so it's not anything Monster Hunter 1 does to a fault, other than doing it. But you get kind of used to it, and as long as there's nothing else to bother you, you can try to avoid that. The quick, like, instant tackles that good and well, again, are a common staple for the series, but they are even worse here since you are just kind of moving slower. There are some ways to mitigate it, like with instant tackles, you stay out of the way of the face, and for the instant tail sweep, which most wyvern boned monsters can do, they'll always do it from one direction, so you're just gonna kind of stay off to one side of the monster. That way you have enough of a tail to get out of the way before the second one. And that's pretty nice, you know. Kut-Ku will teach you a lot of stuff early on about that skeleton, and that is really cool. I don't know if they intended it that way, but it is pretty nice. But there are still some things like Monoblos, Diablos, they have this little tail whip animation, and I think Viserios has it as well, and they'll hit behind you, so you'll hold your shield towards the tail and it'll just kind of kick you over anyways, and that damage starts adding up a lot because if you're not standing on one side of the monster to avoid the tail sweep, you're going to stand on the other side, and that side's usually the one that the tail whip's going to hit. I've pretty much just been accustomed to holding my shield and aiming it backwards to avoid that hit, but sometimes it'll hit from the front and you'll get hit then. It's really learning where those hits are coming from, I guess, which is part of mitigating that. The digging attack is another one where it just kind of comes out so quickly and you're going to get hit by it a lot because they like to dig a lot. You know, minor annoyances in the game that you learn to deal with. It's just a normal part of it. It's not going to be a game where you're going to try to avoid taking damage at all and avoid carting every single time. If you end up getting mad at every single cart, you're not going to be playing the game for very long. It's a standard part of the game. I assume it's intentional to cart at the very least a few times. When getting used to learning the monster and things like that, you can abandon the quest for free. You don't even have to pay the quest fee. So, you know, I feel like they are trying to be somewhat accommodating in that regard. And if you do follow the evolution of the series, as time goes on, you see these annoying things in particular kind of be toned down a bit. They're still there just to give the monster its special flavor, but they do make them less egregious in the amount of time that it wastes. You know, they still use up some time, but not as much. It's just for you to see, oh, he does this because you can stick to walls. Okay, he's going to do an immediate attack rather than just chase me around the map and not even try to land on me or anything like that. But once you actually do fight the monsters, the material gathering part of it feels actually pretty normal. They don't really ask too much of you for any particular piece of gear. I guess the notorious thing would be money, and yes, early on money is kind of a thing where it's scarce and you're not getting a lot of it, so anything you buy is going to deplete your entire savings. But if you grind a lot, and sometimes you're going to be grinding a lot if you need particular materials for a certain hunt, or if you need a rare drop like a 1% drop, you're going to be farming a lot anyway, so you'll get some pretty good capital from that, which you'll then end up spending on a pretty expensive weapon later on. But you kind of, again, it's balanced around that idea, and that's the intent of the game, is that you're going to be farming certain quests for money, and some quests you're going to do for a monster that you don't have space in your item box with materials, so you're also going to sell those materials as well and get a lot more money from that. You just have to learn how to be pretty frugal, I guess, with your money, and learn what you can sell, what you can't, what you feel comfortable with selling, and what you may want to save for later. But the particular materials, like scales and spines and stuff like that, felt, you know, right at home, just gathering what materials I needed. Funnily enough, the scales were actually the thing I didn't get much of from farming Rathalos, because I guess they're just not that high of a drop rate on them, but you know, you get them eventually. You don't get as many quest rewards in this game, but again, I feel like the game's balanced around that, so it's not that bad. And then you have things like Monster Fluid, which I ended up farming Viserios for, not because he gives you Monster Fluid, but he has this poison gas attack, and the area that he stays in has infinitely respawning Vespoid. So while they're annoying if you're only trying to fight Viserios, if you're trying to farm Monster Fluid and you don't want to break the Vespoid carcasses or destroy them so you can carve them, Viserios has your back on that. So while you're, you know, chipping away at him and getting his materials to sell for money or Macrolite ore, they're also just kind of buzzing in and getting killed by the poison gas, and you can carve them up while he charges to the other side of the area. It is really cool. There are some really neat interactions, and there's a lot of potential in just the systems of the game that get bogged down by some really weird design decisions as well. It is neat to see a lot of the bones of the series that started all the way back here that you may not really notice as much nowadays, but really do, end up affecting the experience quite a bit. Overall, I'd say I had a pretty fun time with the game. Yeah, there's moments where you get real mad at it because, again, 6 Genprei jumping all over you while you're still trying to fight a monster with a very weird moveset with not great hitboxes is not fun a lot of the time. But if you can persist through that, you can find some fun with the game. Just don't go in trying to blitz through it, because you're going to end up having a worse experience with that. You're going to end up with bad armor, bad weapons, and you're going to feel like everything's taking too long, and things still take a while. But if you just kind of take some deep breaths and let it be a slow burn of a game, I think you can find some fun in it. Not a game I would recommend to anyone who's like started post 5th gen. Pick like a 3rd gen game to get into and then kind of slowly work your way back to it. But once you have that sort of acquired taste for the older games in the series, I think you can have some fun with it. You don't need to play it. Freedom's right there, and it's just this game, but better. G is also there, but I think Freedom would still be better because it's also more soloable, and you don't have to deal with the right stick controls, and I don't think the camera's as bad, but it may be as bad. But if you just want it for like, a fun, hey, experience it, again, probably try out Freedom first, but if you want to play through every game in the series, then you're going to have to learn to get through a lot of the monotony that the game likes to put you through. My current plan at this point is just to try to solo all of the town quests. I don't know how feasible that is, but that's kind of the point of playing the game, just to find out. Part of me thinks it'll be okay, but we'll see. I haven't fought Plesioth yet either, so we'll see how that goes. He doesn't have any village quests in the Japanese version, so that is nice. At the very least, I don't have to see him until I'm ready to. Either way, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you liked this little ramble session, consider subscribing. I'll put out more of these if you seem to like it. I try to do highlights and stuff too when I have the time. Not that I'm very good at that, but hopefully it'll get a laugh out of you, at the very least with my clowning around. Either way, once again, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I will see you next time. Goodbye.